Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Fired Up and Plugged In podcast powered by Emergency Reporting. This is the podcast for all 21st century fire and EMS personnel. I'm Tom Lewis, Enterprise Training Manager and the podcast producer. Joining our distinguished host, Randy Brugman, is Dr. Denis Onieal, a retired federal official responsible for the management of the United States Fire Administration. Dr. Onieal will share his thoughts on the role data plays in today's fire and emergency services. After serving in the Army, he joined the Jersey City Fire Department, rising to the position of acting chief. Dr. Onieal has earned a Bachelor of Science from New Jersey City University, a Master of Public Administration from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a doctorate in education from New York University, NYU. He also taught in the master and doctorate programs in education at NYU for 5 years. Starting on September 12, 2001, he led the United States Fire Administration's team at the World Trade Center to help FDNY reestablish their systems of command, control, and on-site communications. He is the recipient of many awards, including the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs President's Award of Distinction, the Fire Engineering Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Firehouse Magazine Lifetime Achievement Award. Welcome back to our podcast, Dr. Onieal. Chief Brugman, it's all yours, sir.
Good day, everyone, and welcome back to another session of Fired Up and Plugged In. And today it's my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Denis Onieal, a former career fire official who is well known for his work at the National Fire Academy and the U.S. Fire Administration. Dr. Onieal, welcome back.
Randy, it's good to be with you again.
Oh, thank you. It's good to have you back. When we kind of ended our first session, we talked a little bit about wanting to explore that. And I know that you have had a long history and actually the development of where we're at today. I mean, I think your PhD was really focused in that arena. And so could you just give us a kind of an overview of what your history has been with the development of data as we know it today in the fire and emergency services? And then we'll kind of step forward with, where you see that going.
Thanks, Randy. It began really with my research at New York University when I was working on my doctorate. And the National Fire Incident Reporting System had just transferred over into the capability to be used on a desktop computer as opposed to a mainframe computer, which in those days was pretty remarkable that you could do a PC-based fire department data system. So I started to look at it and I realized that there were some challenges associated with that for the local fire department. So the fundamental research that I did, my doctoral dissertation, was about the introduction of a technology really into an organization. It really looked at how do we introduce the concept of data collection and analysis into an organization that had never done it before. And the short Reader's Digest version of my findings was that it was not a technology issue, it was a training issue. That if you train the people to do it the right way, and if you are a manager and you follow up and make sure that they follow the rules in the beginning, that the system will work pretty well. Mm-hmm. And the next thing I wanted to look at, which I really got to look at the national level when I got to the fire administration, was how do you use the data? But when I went into the fire department in Jersey City, that's where I studied, that's where I was working at the time. And I went to the chief of the department, John Mullins, who really supported it. And when I had the meeting with him, I said, look, Chief, there may be things we find out that we don't want to know. And as soon as I find those things, I'm going to come in here and tell you what they are, so that you know the bad news first. And so we started to look at what data we were collecting, and no one was using it. We looked at response times, we looked at the battalions, we looked at companies. There was one individual, a battalion chief, who was dogging it on fire alarms in city housing projects. And, so I went in to see the chief and I said, look, pick the phone up with this guy and read him the riot act, tell him we know what he's doing and not to do it again. And it really saved our bacon later on because probably within 2 years, there was a serious loss of life. There were 7 or 8 people killed in a city housing project, and the response times were right on target.
Yeah. It's bring up a really good point. That data really does tell a story.
Yeah. And you have to look for it sometimes. And when we look at what some fire departments are doing, our good friend Adam Teal, for example, is in Philadelphia, fire commissioner. And Adam went into Philadelphia, and their data system was working, but they weren't collecting the data as accurately as they could. I don't want to tell any tales out of school publicly here, but Adam turned it around. He said to them, "We will count everything now, and I will check to make sure that we are counting everything now." Mm-hmm. And using data, Adam added 5 engine companies, 2 ladder companies, and 2 battalions to the Philadelphia Fire Department. Now, Philadelphia is an old city. It's an old inner city. It's not growing. And he was successful in the use of data and making his arguments to add to the department. So when you can tell that kind of a story in 2000, and he did it in 2020, 1 year ago, when you can do that story with data, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, very much so. What do you think about, we look in the fire and emergency service a lot about capturing data, and we're really good at the inputs and the outputs that we have, but we're a little bit lax on the outcomes.
Right, I agree.
From a fire chief's perspective and a senior leader in the fire service, what would you tell the young firefighter coming up about the importance of looking at what actually happens at the end of the road after we've got there, done what we do, and measuring those outcomes, because those outcomes actually relate right back to the inputs. It's pretty critical.
I don't know that I'd begin with the new firefighter. I think where I would begin is the mid to senior level officer in the fire department, and try to help them understand the fire service. We both love it, okay? And I'm going to be a loving critic for a moment. We bring in people as a single entry point, and we expect them to blossom into all of these different talents. We expect them to blossom into hazmat technicians and technical rescue technicians and firefighters and medics and all these things. And then if there are, as you get up into the ranks, you're going into administrative positions for which you've had no preparation whatsoever. Your preparation is the 2 days before the guy retired or gal retired, before you came in the door. So, I mean, we're not checking people coming in the job to see how good they can read data. Can they do analysis? Can they do statistical analysis? Can they manipulate software? Can they do all of these things? And the answer is probably not. So, again, I'm being a loving critic here.
Yeah.
So what I would say to the fire departments out there who are not getting the outcomes from the data that they're collecting is I would go to a local university. I would go to an IT professor or a statistical analyst, or with one of those departments, public administration departments in a local a local 4-year college or graduate school. And I'd offer internships to students, pay them $20 an hour to come in and take your data and start to manipulate the data the way they're being taught in graduate school. And then every 6 months, you get a new batch of students in, and they would love it for a number of reasons. One, they're getting $20 an hour. Secondly, they're doing something real. It's not an academic exercise like the data that they get in the schools to do the analysis. And then they're doing something important for the community. On the better side, and typically the schools will allow these internships, the students can get 3 college credits or 6 college credits, whatever deal you can cut. And you're getting sharp minds that understand the systems, that know the data, and they just have to be familiarized with the fire department lingo and how the data works and what you're looking at. The other thing that they can do is take software that's readily available, commercial software like Power BI, which is the Microsoft product, or Tableau, which is another software package, and they can dump the data off into those analysis packages and do your dashboards and do all that stuff. And I'm just going to talk about the ex-fire department whose data analysis person happens to have either bad knees or recuperating from triple bypass surgery. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. So
yeah,
to get some new blood, new eyes, and new talent, and they don't have to have a badge and a uniform to do that kind of work.
Yeah, and they can really make a difference organizationally.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just as you pointed out with Chief Teal and what he's done in Philadelphia, I mean, I've had some great data analysts in organizations that I've run that have really been able to, paint that picture differently, and it was critical when we went to council and talked about adding resources or the need to maybe offer an additional service, and here are the reasons why, and you can back that up with quality data and information, and it makes their job from an elected official standpoint much easier to make a decision if they're going to spend that kind of money or take that kind of a political risk on introducing a new service.
Well, we are the department that cities kind of love. I mean, we get great stories. We're good people. We do. Everybody's happy to see us. And a lot of times, the elected officials, at least in my view, if they're given a sound enough reason, a good enough excuse, if you will, a good enough story, they'll pretty much give you, if they can, they'll give you what you want.
Yeah, yeah, and it helps when you can back that up with really sound numbers.
Sure. Talk to Adam.
Yeah. So, as we move farther into and you touched on this, but as we move farther into the 21st century, the use of advanced analytics is going to become more pronounced. And for organizations that are beginning to think about what they're going to look like 10, 15 years from now, what advice would you give them?
There's a couple of things, and I may have given you this story before about Plato's, the story, the Elegy of the Caves. I did. Okay. So they need to get out of their department and look in other places where there are data available to them to tell them what's going on in the community. Yeah. Now, the county or the city planning department, depending upon how big the government is, they have remarkable data. The Chamber of Commerce, the Census Bureau, there are whole community development parts of the city that can tell them what is planned for the city so that you are well aware of what's coming up long before it comes up. You can look five years out. Where are we going to be? You should be looking, if you're the fire chief or the data analyst for the fire department, you should be looking at your demographics. What's your age distribution? What's your income distribution? Where are your high income areas, your low income areas? And you can overlay that data with your fire incident data, and it can tell you some remarkable stories. It's going to be a different story in every community. But the short answer to your question is the world doesn't center around fire headquarters. You've got to get out. You've got to go to other departments in the city, other government agencies, the federal government, Bureau of Labor Statistics. There is a whole host of different data sources that can tell you what's going on in your community. And almost, they're not perfectly in terms of prediction, but they're pretty close. They're a heck of a lot better than we are in telling you what's going to be happening in the future.
I totally agree with that. And I think one of the things I have explored data over my career, I think that I've come to the realization that the socioeconomic factors that exist in every community, and they're different in every community, are drivers of what we're going to respond to in large part in our organizations. And it's when we talk about advanced BI and predictive modeling, you really have to get past, just not the number of people and where they're going to live eventually. It gets drilled down into some of the information you're talking about, as far as, what's their socioeconomic condition, what's their educational level, what's, what their median income. and some of those factors, because that's really what drives them being able to afford good health care, live in a well-maintained building, be able to get their kids to school, if they're single parent versus having two parents or maybe just latchkey kids or whatever. All of those factors drive our responses. And we probably should be looking more at that and being part of the solution to correct some of those issues, as opposed to just responding on the back end. What's your thought on that?
Well, I just want to maybe preempt what I'm going to say by keying off a word that you use, predictive analytics. And I just want to caution the listeners that there are a lot of charlatans out there who will tell you that you can use historic data to predict the future. Well, if they're so smart, they should be buying and selling stock. And you cannot use historical data to predict the future. And any department that's being told that they can predict is being sold a bill of goods. I'll just leave it at that. So I would be very cautious about using historical data to predict the future. But it will give you trends. It will give you ideas. It will give you directions to look to help you prepare. If you're a ship going out to sea and you know that the tides are going a certain way and the wind is going a certain way, you can take advantage of that. If you're flying in a plane, you can take advantage of the winds or not. So I would view that the historical data, I would view the data that you're going to get from the census and all the other places as winds and tides. They can help you negotiate where you're going. What you don't want to be is ignoring the winds and tides and find yourself floundering.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I found one of the most informational sessions that I had was sitting down with some of our social service people when I was in California, because they're in the neighborhoods every day, and they have a piece of intel that won't show up on a data sheet.
You're right. Absolutely right.
Yeah, but it's very intuitive knowledge that actually has great relevance to what we do each and every day. So, I mean, incorporating and reaching out to others in the community that have a piece of some part of the service in the community to share information back and forth is pretty critical. So we look ahead: smart buildings, smart cities, autonomous cars. All of the things that's actually emerging now. I mean, we're seeing it's almost like every week something new is new idea, new concept. Now we're going into space and coming right back, and I mean, if you really think about just what's occurring around us and the speed that it's happening is quite phenomenal. And you just wonder where we're going to be in 30 years. But I mean, how are we going to use all this information as we move forward?
There's a concept in information theory called the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, which talks about the amount of information that we can, as human beings, not firefighters or just normal human beings, can hold in our short-term memory and process. And that's why telephone numbers started out to be 7 digits, because you could call information and remember the 7 digits. If you're relaxed and you're prepared and you're trained, you can maybe manipulate 9. If you're under stress, maybe 5. So I think to begin with, you're absolutely right that all this information is available to us on almost an instantaneous basis, and more is coming. The question is how much you're going to overload the IC at an incident with the data. Now, let me give you some examples that we know of already. We know that FirstNet has broadband. They have the communications capability for emergency response, police, fire, EMS. And there are capabilities, for example, I'm not making this up, but they have vests that monitor your body functions. Does the IC need to know the blood pressure of every firefighter at the scene? The body core temperature? How is that fitting into your strategy and tactics? I'm not saying it's not important. It is important, but it's who is it important to, and how are you going to use the information? So when we begin, and we are beginning to collect this data, we need to be able to make sure that we know where to put it and how to use it and who's going to use it before the individuals get overloaded with information. Now, they are also working on, FirstNet is also working on X, Y, and Z axis. Z axis is the vertical axis for location. And it's not perfect yet, but they're working on it. Mm. But that's important data to know. Where are your companies? That kind of thing. So when we're going to be 5 years out, 10 years out, guys like you and me are going to be kind of lost. I mean, the 30-year retirement is our gift that we just can't adapt to these changes. Ooh, I'm getting out, But the reality of it is that the new generation coming up will be more used to using the data, communicating with it, and they will have it as a normal course of events. But I would caution, as the data systems are being developed, that we begin to think about who's going to use the data and how are they going to use it. Mm-hmm. And the example that I would use is, does the IC need to know everyone's blood pressure at the scene? Do they need to know everybody's body core temperature at the scene? Do they need to know where they are in the elevation? Maybe yes.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And again, I think the folks that are developing software programs and analytic programs for the future have to take into account that all this information overload has to be culled in some way so that it is meaningful at the right time for people in the street, but it's also meaningful for the fire chief as they're amassing all this information for their organization in their city. And so advanced analytics, probably artificial intelligence, things like that, as it becomes more developed and more accepted, probably will help to instantaneously look at all of that data and say, you have 2 firefighters on the scene right now that need to come out and rest.
Yeah. But as part of the incident command system, that information section, that information officer should probably have, or the operations officer should have a AI, artificial intelligence, or an intelligence function to collect all that data and at least advise the IC on things that are off the margins.
Yeah, and just think how that's going to change our dispatch systems.
Yes, yeah.
All of this information coming into our 911 communication centers, I mean, if we had the ability to analyze that instantaneously or within a couple of seconds, the information that it could provide to the dispatcher before we ever launch at all these buildings and cars, I mean, it's just, you think about, all of the potential, and it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Kind of like kids in a candy store. Oh, yeah, I'd like to know that, or I'd like to know that, or I'd like to know that. We will have to separate out what's the need to know versus the nice to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the upside is that it's available now.
Yeah.
It will become more and more data will become available. So it's just a matter of how we can actually capture it and be able to figure out how to use it in a real-time basis so that it's making the job safer in the street and also making the fire chief's job a little bit easier, going, this is what's actually happening, and we need to do these 3 or 4 things to make our organization better and or the city and city safer. So as we what advice would you share with a new firefighter today as you look ahead in the next 15 or 20 years? What do you think? What changes do you believe that they're going to be faced with in the next 20, 25 years?
There are a couple of things trying to get sorted out right now, Randy, that I don't know how it's going to affect the fire service, but I can assure you that we're going to be involved in it. One of them right now is the behavioral aspects of police department response on medical calls and emergency calls and handling those kinds of things. Now, there used to be my traditional description of the difference between a police officer and a firefighter was a police officer handled people. if it's a people problem, they handle it. And if it was a thing problem, a heart attack, a windblown sign, or a street cave-in or something, the fire department would typically handle it. But as this society is changing and we're dealing with these new kinds of emerging issues, somehow I believe either through the EMS portal or something like it, we're going to be involved in behavioral health issues. So I would keep my eyes out for that. I don't know where it's going to land, but something is going to happen there. The most important thing I think that new firefighter coming in should understand, we both know what a great career it is, but it's because we took advantage of the opportunities that were afforded to us in terms of education and training. And I would encourage them to do that. Get engaged in a local school, an online school, accredited university, regionally accredited university, and pursue the education piece. Get the training, get out of your department, and be exposed to new ideas. Go to your state training facility, go to the National Fire Academy, go to conferences like Fire Rescue International, Fire Department Instructors Conference, those kinds of things, and see what's going on. Pay attention to what's going on. And you will do well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're great examples of being exposed to other people that had long-term visions and then opened doors for us.
And all you had to do was ask.
Yeah.
And you know them, the Ronnie Coleman, the Alan Brunicinis, the Vinnie Dunns, all the, that's just the way they are. And they'll show you the way they'll help you any way they can.
But you don't find them sitting in your firehouse.
No, and they're not going to walk in the door either.
You have to go find them.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's one of the, I guess, I mean, we're both very blessed, I think, to have had that opportunity, but it probably happened because we wanted it to.
Yeah. And, from our last conversation that you hung out with the smart kids, who in your department is advancing, who's going outside to learn, to do those things, and start hanging out with the smart kids.
Yeah. So what do you think fire chiefs and senior leaders need to be doing today to begin to prepare their organizations for the next few years? Because they've got a heavy burden right now. They
do. Well, we've mentioned a few things, going into the other city agencies to have data on the city and the city's plans and the city's future. The fire department, again, we mentioned this before, make sure that you're bringing in, or try to at least, bring in some people that have data analysis skills, data generation skills. There's a couple of things in terms of data collection that I'll pass along for whatever they're worth. One is, what I found in my research was that the key to success, there were only two. One was to make sure that the people were trained to complete the forms and submit the data. Mm-hmm. And secondly, to follow up to make sure that they did it correctly and ping them, make sure, you as a chief how to send a message down. Mm-hmm. You're not going to pencil whip this report. I'm going to send it back to you. And if I send it back to you a second time, you and your battalion chief are going to be in my office explaining why. Mm-hmm. And, when that message gets down, the data becomes accurate. They're not pencil whipping the reports. The second piece is to be careful with your data where it goes. I'm not going to be critical of any companies or anything like that, but there are fire departments and individuals in fire departments that are giving their data to outside organizations. And let's take exposure data, all right, exposure forms. If those exposure forms don't comply with your particular pension system in your city or your state, the data they're collecting may not be sufficient for you to make a claim if you are mm-hmm. injured. Secondly, if you're giving it to an outside company, are they going to be around in 15 years to produce the data when you need it, or 10 or 15 years? So with respect to certain kinds of personnel data, I would recommend that it not go outside the organization, that it stays inside the organization, and it collects the data that comports with whatever pension system you're using. Now, I'll use one example. In my state, and I had three major pension battles to get families survivor benefits. I won two of them and lost one of them. And it had to do with the word traumatic event. And in New Jersey, if you don't have a traumatic event, it's not a line of duty death in those days. Well, they defined a traumatic event as a force outside your body, not self-initiated, blah, blah, blah. And that was a very, very technical term in New Jersey. It's since been changed, but there's many pension systems out there with similar types of definitions that you've got to deal with. And if you're in the Philadelphia Fire Department and you're sending your data to Chicago, it may not be the kind of data that you need in Philadelphia to defend yourself. So I would be very cautious about where the data goes, who's collecting it, who has access to it, how is it being secured, and then does it comport with your local and state laws with respect to incidents, with respect to the laws, with respect to the pension and survivor benefits.
That's a great point. I think one other that I would make is that that whatever system you're using, you should own your own data.
Yep.
And because I mean, we've had in my career, many times we're going back 20 years looking at the logbooks, trying to find the logbooks from a station because this firefighter was on a significant incident 20 years ago, and that's the proof that they were on the incident.
Yeah.
And so whatever data that's collected on exposures, whatever system, I totally agree with everything you've said, but you need to have ownership of your own data. Even if it's shared with the city, you need to be able to access that, because after you're retired, it gets a lot more difficult to access that information.
Oh, yeah. And you know, we're looking at stories now every day about systems being hacked and who's got access and those kinds of things. It's a whole new area of things for chiefs to worry about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know.
Yeah, that's really true. So, well, we're kind of coming up on our time today. I just wanted to see if you had any final thoughts. You know, what would you like to share with let's say with the captain that's right in the front seat and is thinking about, I think I'd like to be a chief officer. I think I might want to be a fire chief someday. What would you share with them?
Probably the first thing I'd share with them is to try to watch other chief officers in your department to see who's doing right and who's doing wrong, what they're doing that you like and what they're doing that you don't like, and what the reaction to their actions are. The second is don't announce that you want to be a chief because you're just, inviting harassment on yourself. I don't think the firehouse has changed too much. And when you look back on the people who have been successful in our careers, they're the people who contributed to the job, who did the extras, who didn't take any shortcuts, who worked hard, who helped others. And those are the people that will do well in the job. Mm-hmm. Whatever the testing process is for promotion, whatever it is, practice that system. If it's test taking, understand this. There's a difference between knowledge and test taking.
Yeah.
It's different skills. Okay.
Yeah.
So learn the skills of test taking and learn the knowledge.
Yeah, it's one thing to actually get promoted. It's another thing to actually do the job.
Oh yeah.
It's really two separate. I mean, there are some knowledge transfers there, but you're right. I mean, you have to learn how to take the test to actually get the ring, mm-hmm. so you can move up. But once you move up, it's different. So, well, Dennis, thank you so much for being with me again today, and it's always a great honor and
it's fun, Randy.
Yeah, pleasure to share time with you as we've done in the past, and we'll do it again.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
Take care now.
You too.